Rezlife, it's Shannon here, your confirmation pastor. And throughout this Lent, we have been reading through the book of Luke and looking at these stories of how Jesus reached out and became friends with outsiders and outcasts. We've seen how he healed the sick and cared for widows. He invited poor fishermen and women to be his disciples. And he made time for little children and even treated foreigners with kindness and compassion. And because of all this, he was beginning to get a reputation. Outsiders and outcasts began to seek out Jesus as someone they could turn to and trust. In our story for today, one particular outsider was seeking after Jesus, hoping to just catch a glimpse of this man he had heard so much about. So let's read through this passage together and see if we can figure out why. It comes from Luke chapter 19. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through town. A man there named Zacchaeus, a ruler among tax collectors, was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he couldn't because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed up a sycamore tree so he could see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. When Jesus came to that spot, he looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, come down at once. I must stay in your home today." So Zacchaeus came down at once, happy to welcome Jesus. Everyone who saw this grumbled, saying, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone, I repay them 4 times as much." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this household because he too is a son of Abraham. The human one came to seek and save the lost." When I was little and I heard this story, people would say that no one liked Zacchaeus. No one wanted to be his friend. But Jesus did. Jesus went out of his way to make friends with Zacchaeus. He sought him out of the crowd and he said, "Hey, I'm coming over to your house and I'm going to spend time with you." Because that's just who Jesus is. Jesus intentionally sought out and befriended outcasts like Zacchaeus. But why was Zacchaeus an outcast in the first place? Why did he have to climb this tree to see Jesus? And why wouldn't the crowd just let him through to see him? Were people mean to him just because he was short? I mean, that's really not a nice way to treat short people. But later, as an adult, when I began to read this passage and study it, I learned more about why Zacchaeus was considered an outsider and an outcast in the first place in his society. So why was Zacchaeus considered an outcast? Well, the passage gives us 3 clues. Number 1, Zacchaeus was a tax collector. Not only was he a tax collector, but we are also told that he was a ruler among tax collectors, a chief tax collector who supervised other tax collectors. Now, tax collectors aren't what we think of today. Now, sure, nobody likes paying taxes even now, but back then, tax collectors were hired by the Roman Empire. Now, these were a ruling foreign government. They had invaded the Israelites' land and were now telling the Israelites that they had to pay a bunch of money to them. Then they would hire Jews to go among their own people to collect the tax money. So tax collectors were working for the enemy government, and they were making a lot of money doing so. So in other words, Zacchaeus was working for the enemy, and because of that, he was an outcast among his own Jewish people. Number 2, Zacchaeus was called a sinner. The people around the situation called Zacchaeus a sinner, and we don't exactly know what that means, but we can make some educated guesses. Now, he probably didn't obey all the religious laws that good Jews were supposed to follow, like not eating certain foods or not working on the Sabbath. As a tax collector, he probably took a little extra off the top for himself, taking a little extra money from people. And he even admits that he may have cheated people out of their taxes. Now, all of these things would have made him a sinner and an outsider to his fellow Jews. Number 3, Zacchaeus was rich, filthy rich. Now, at that time, Jesus' following was primarily a movement among the poor. His disciples were fishermen, women, people who had previously been sick and disabled. They weren't the popular ones. They weren't the rich ones. And because they had all been outsiders their whole lives, they didn't necessarily want this rich guy, Zacchaeus, tagging along with them. But Jesus came for everyone, the rich, the poor, the popular, the unpopular, insiders and outsiders alike. So because of all this, it's no wonder the people grumbled and said, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner," when Jesus basically invited himself over to Zacchaeus' house. But even though no one wanted to include Zacchaeus in the group, Jesus looked up and saw him. Jesus intentionally sought him out and invited him to be his friend. Jesus was always doing this. He was always befriending the outcasts. Jesus saw Zacchaeus not only for who he was, a rich tax collector, a cheater, a sinner, but he saw him for who he could be. Jesus looked up at Zacchaeus and he saw his potential, and that changed everything. Because Jesus saw Zacchaeus and sought him out and invited him into friendship, Zacchaeus turned his whole life around. He gave away his possessions to the poor, he stopped his cheating ways, and he paid back everything that he had stolen from people with 4 times interest. So how does all of this apply to us? Well, first, wherever you are at in life, whether you are hiding from Jesus up in a tree or running away from him or running up to catch him, Jesus sees you too. Even though Zacchaeus was hiding up in a tree, Jesus looked up and saw him. The whole point of this story is wrapped up in that last verse. The human one, that's Jesus. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. Second, Jesus doesn't see you for who you are right now. Whether you are an insider, an outsider, popular or unpopular, a sinner or a saint, Jesus sees you for who you could be. Everyone else saw Zacchaeus as this cheater, this sinner, this tax collector, but Jesus saw his potential. And Jesus doesn't care where you're at right now. He is inviting you to come along with him to where he's going. And finally, Jesus sees what you can offer the world. Jesus knows that you have something beautiful and amazing to offer others. Now, Zacchaeus offered up his money and resources to the poor, but you have something to offer too. Your time, your talents, your gifts, your presence, your compassion. We each have something unique to bring to the table, and your contribution will be missed if you don't offer it up. Jesus is inviting each of us into friendship with him and is asking us to join in with what he's doing in the world. So like wee little Zacchaeus, I hope that you'll come along.